good morning, good afternoon, everybody. It's another day, so we've got another poem. This one is not by Robert Frost. I know everyone's breathing a sigh of relief. This is by Gwendolyn Brooks, who is an African-American poet who wrote a lot and well. And so I wanted to read this poem. It's probably her most famous, or it was the first one that I heard from her. It's called We Real Cool, and it's a fantastic and very quick introduction to a sort of anti-educational notion, and well, I think you'll see. We'll get into it presently. We Real Cool by Gwendolyn Brooks. The pool players, 7 at the Golden Shovel. We real cool. We left school. We lurk late. We strike straight. We sing sin. We thin gin. We jazz June. We die soon.
So it sounds real cool until the end.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounded like a pretty nice life for a while, didn't it?
It kind of drops at the end, about 6 feet.
Yeah.
Ouch. Well,
yeah.
We've given a title to this episode of Is School a Prison? Or how are schools like prisons? Or it could be posed a number of different ways. Mm-hmm. But it's sad to me that many of my students, anyway, think of it in such terms. Kind of would probably cheer for your poem. Even they'd be pulled up by the end, but I think they would dismiss the end as that's just rhetoric. It right. Really would be.
So it was written by a teacher after all.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. You had to get the moral in there somehow, but the other parts, it's better to not be in school than to be in school. School ain't cool. Mm-hmm. Is very common thought these days.
Yeah, and I would say here, like, this is the genius of Brooks, right? Like, which side of this dilemma is she on? Like, oh man, I don't like. There's a critique certainly of when you have the teenagers die soon at the end. We don't know if that's at age 17 or something, but they die soon, whatever that means. By saying that, she absolutely is critiquing this get out of school, who cares about school idea.
Right. She could be going two directions.
Compelling. Yeah. Like, she also absolutely is critiquing, like this resonates because there is an authenticity to it. This is compelling to many, many students. And so she's giving them voice too. Like, that's important.
Yep. And many of the students who would mirror her, at least initial, hey, it's better to get out of school than stay in it. They're measuring it against worth. And I think that ultimately she's putting it at the level of what is a life worth? Are we doing enough significant in school, or would it just be better to skip all this and go live life? What is the criteria for a well-lived life? Mm-hmm. And I think that we have a lot of reasons to look hard at what we do in school. The teachers generally, I know not entirely, but generally in a traditional school type setting, homeschooling even more so, but even in a traditional school, teachers are a lot of what determines what goes on in a given classroom. And I think we need to consider the metaphor that maybe not even the majority, but a significant portion of our students feel like they're in prison rather than a place of happiness.
Right.
I don't even know.
Growth. Yeah.
Significance that this is worth being in, and I don't mind being here because I'm getting something out of it. I think many of the students feel like they're just being babysat or worse.
Yeah.
Kept busy, doing time.
I came across a quote recently from Marshall McLuhan, who I don't really know that much about, but he said that schools had become or were becoming places of detention rather than attention.
Yep.
And I think that's a pretty good, albeit sad, synopsis of what's happening sometimes in some places. Right. I don't want to get on the microphone and just sort of lament education generally all over the place everywhere. I think that there are some really wonderful things happening. But this is a notion that we're going to have to run up against and deal with. Yes.
And I face it increasingly, I think in part because of many of the answers people are trying to give to it. Okay, oh, son, don't you understand? Oh, son, don't you understand? You need to go to school so you can get a good job.
Mm-hmm.
Well, son comes back with a list of 26 people, all of whom are well-known billionaire jet set type people who dropped out of high school or dropped out of college or
right.
Somehow or another stick a finger in the eye of my argument.
Right.
Okay, now what you going to say, Dad? Yes, exactly. Well, these are just a few that prove the exceptions prove the rule, my son.
Statistically, son, I don't understand statistics. What does that have to do with anything?
And I feel like some of the discussion about this is not. We aim it at the child.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you should just try and get more out of it. Or you need to sleep more, or you need to. That's why I told you need to have your breakfast. That's the problem. You feel like you're in prison because you're hungry.
Right.
It's not all their fault, right?
No. Good.
We are doing.
You started there. That's important.
Yeah, we're doing education wrong at times by keeping them busy, by constantly concerned about measurement, by dehumanizing or depersonalizing education, and students are people too. They feel it.
Mm-hmm.
One of the ironic experiences of my current teaching experience is in my seminar class. We read what we now have an episode out on Joseph Pieper's Leisure, the Basis of Culture, where he gets into this distinction between contemplation or leisure and work. And he even applies it to school. And I have this weird look appear. In fact, the day we discuss that part of the book, they all come in kind of hungry.
Yeah.
Like, okay, Elliot, get past all your normal start, get the prayer out of the way and all that crap. And I want to have this conversation because I think this school that has me reading this book is shooting itself in the foot.
Yeah, exactly. How are you going to, this time, your canon speaks against you.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, that's exactly right.
That's amazing, by the way. I would say anytime that you can bring in a text like that where students are like, yeah, wait a minute, like they're taking ownership of it and they're really starting to, well, you know what? They did that one day when they were doing that. I bet they didn't feel like it was a prison that day.
Right. Well, that's their comment is
they were like, "Hey, we're overthrowing this place, and we're gonna use your instruments to do it."
And they go out to other classes and beg for their other classes to be more like seminar, which not every class can be.
Sure.
But every class can be more inquisitive and full of dialogue than maybe it currently is. I had the same experience with Plato, right? When we're working through the cave analogy, one student is just staring at the 60-inch screen in my room. And I said, man, participation and all that, what are you doing? And he says, oh, I'm sorry, I was staring at the shadows on the wall. Now, there's nothing on the screen at that moment, but
Sure.
he's recognizing this is real.
Yeah, stuff's happening. Yeah.
And the analogy of the cave, which we have an episode on, is about people who are chained, right? They are prisoners and don't want to be free. Mm-hmm. I do have students who I think feel safer in the school prison because they know the routine and they know what's coming next, and they know that this just my release date is coming close, especially when I'm in high school. They're like, I'm just playing the game, man, till my probation, right, or my emancipation, or whatever they want to call it. And when I've taught courses on movie making, we almost always watch Shawshank Redemption.
Oh no!
And that movie develops this notion of eventually you become institutionalized. Eventually, if school is like a prison, it institutionalizes them. It numbs them. It takes that. If you're familiar with that film, there's a scene in the lunchroom in the cafeteria where Andy starts talking about that thing that they can't get to. That thing he's just gotten out of like 30 days in solitary, and they're like, that's got to be very difficult. Must have really stressed you out. And he's like, no. Because there's that me inside me that they can't get at. Yeah. And the old Red says, what are you talking about? And he says, hope. Of course, the reply of Red as he gets up to leave is, hope's a dangerous thing in here, Andy. Yeah. He stalks off because he's become institutionalized. He's not sure that he can hope in anything anymore. And that's just so antithetical, so scary to me as a teacher that I would have any part in tearing a soul down that way. I want to build it up, and especially junior seniors, I want to see them yearning to certainly get all they can while they're there, but get out and get going. And I think that there should be a sense of release from school, but not one that's like the end of a prison sentence where you walk out with your little kit out the front door and it's like, well, now what?
I thought that you were going to actually mention the end of Shawshank Redemption where Red does get out. And, he's working at that grocery store, I think, bagging groceries. And he says, hey, he kind of flags the manager. Hey, can I need to go to the bathroom. And the manager says, dude, well, not dude, it's like the 70s or something. I don't know. But, hey, Red, stop. If you have to go to the bathroom, just go. Quit asking me. And then Red sort of commentary or narration says, I've had to ask permission to go to the bathroom for 50 years. I cannot use the bathroom. He says something else, but I cannot use the bathroom without say so.
Right.
Someone has to tell me. And that's an extreme example. That's 50 years. Okay. But we want students who, when they leave school, they feel like they've just reached the bottom of a hill running. And so they have momentum going into whatever's next. We don't want students who are in a situation where they say, I don't feel like I can solve a problem without say so. Someone has to tell me to do it.
Yeah, boom. That's exactly where my mind goes. And so many become so used to, and I don't mean this in the wrong way, I mean it the way I mean it, finding the right answer, writing that 5-paragraph paper, eliminating 2 of the 4 choices right away, and then a 50-50 guess on the 2 remaining. Right. And I'm naming parts to the game.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not a game. It should be preparatory for a well-lived life, not time to be put in.
Mm-hmm.
And to make matters worse, depending on how far you push this metaphor, there are many kids, unfortunately, who spend a significant amount of their 13 or 17 years of formal education in solitary, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody knows what's really going on inside them. They're just sort of me, and they bump into other people, but it's not a community. And
right.
I have enough interaction, especially with large schools, to know that that's a real danger, is that it's often those quiet little ones in the corner that are having the biggest trouble.
Yeah.
And nobody notices because it's the clown or the cut up or the kid that's overtly a problem that everybody's focused on.
Yeah.
And I don't want school to be like a prison, but I'm willing to raise my hand with many of my students and say at times it does feel like one. And pushing back against that, we've done some weird things on this podcast, one of which is the constant use of poetry. I think that's a place there. That's a integration between that concept and this one. Things like poetry.
Well, for Andy, it was opera, right?
Yeah, right. I didn't realize we were going to build this whole podcast around a movie, or it would have been a "Have you seen?" instead of.
Right.
But yeah, there's that. He bolts the door shut and realizes I can play this beautiful aria across all the PA system. And for a few brief, and Red again comes on the narration. I don't have any idea what she was singing about, but
it sounded like freedom or hope.
Yes,
or whatever.
right.
Yeah.
For a few minutes, all those prisoners were just right there with her. Poetry and music were having its effect.
Yeah.
And in a foreign language, they, without the sense thereof, it was just beautiful. Beauty by itself released them.
Yeah.
And that's my goal for my students. Get those chains off your hands. Come on out here in the real light of truth.
Yeah. Well, let's pause here, and when we come back, I want to see if we can kind of think out a couple of ways in which schools function as prisons or can, and then maybe some ways to kind of short circuit that or get around it.
While this show is a back porch discussion, it does cost a little bit of money. So if you're liking what you hear, consider helping us out. You can simply use the donation button on the website to send along a one-time gift, or we have subscriber plans for those who want to commit to regular support. Subscribers can get premium rewards depending on how nice a chair you pull up on the porch. We have everywhere from sitting on the floor to our finest rocking chair available. But whatever you can do, know that it helps us keep the conversation going. And for that, we heartily thank you.
Okay, Steve, so coming back, let's just sort of rapid fire. This may not be very rapid fire if we're not on it, but I kind of want to signal or highlight some ways that schools do function or end up functioning the way that prisons do, like commonalities or overlap there, just to kind of drive that metaphor home and see what there is. So,
well, let me start with the first one. I'll give you the first one, and then you be thinking of what your most important one is. But okay. To me, the single most obvious correlation is rules.
Okay. Yeah.
And I'm going to scare a bunch of school administrators when I say that. But even when I was a school administrator, I reminded my teachers on a regular basis, the reason we form a rule is to remove the need to think.
Yeah.
Rules kill thinking.
Yep.
And it is the way of prisons they're not there to make people think. Mm-hmm. They're to house people who have lost the right to be free citizens.
Right.
And we're trying with school to create free citizens. But one of the ways we go about it is the same way a prison tries to eliminate the need for any thinking. As we were saying earlier with Red, you'll pee when I tell you to pee.
Mm-hmm.
You eat when I tell you to, not when you're hungry, when it's mealtime.
Right.
There's lights out. You can or can't have various things. You will do these things and these things only at these times.
Mm-hmm.
You have very little choice. You have very little variation. You just follow the rules.
Yeah.
And
so I think, go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to say that translates itself into teaching in so many, not just the functional rules of bells and eat now and don't chew gum in the classroom, but even in the teaching itself, just learn to do what I'm telling you to do and you can pass the class is a whole lot different than the freeing, engaging version that says, let's figure this out together. We're trying to get past the rules to the understanding.
Yeah, exactly. So, and you kind of, a lot of the stuff that you mentioned is for me kind of runs right into one that I think about, which is that schools sometimes and prisons almost always are driven by efficiency.
Yeah.
Right. So what's the most efficient way? Like if you have a buffet that's open 24/7, that's not going to work for a prison, right? Because it's going to cost you all kinds of extra money and all kinds of extra security risk and whatnot, which is money, for you to have a buffet that's open for anyone who wants to eat whatever they want, whenever they want. It's far easier to set times for someone to eat, everybody get in and eat, shut up, and get out, right? And it's the same way with classes, right? Like to teach some student at their own pace, whenever they want, whatever they want. Wow, that's going to be really tough. That's going to be really expensive. Instead, let's just get them all in there, sit them down, cram it down their throats, and get out and get on to the next spot.
Right. So it's a conundrum caused by, in part at least, compulsory education.
Yeah.
That once we said everybody's got to be in school, and then population started, I mean, I don't want to get too weird with this, but I've heard somebody draw the correlation. The baby boomers radically changed American education by almost in a single year. There around, I think it was 1951, the kindergarten population doubled in size from what had been the year before, and that pressed teachers. There wasn't that many more classrooms or teachers. It just meant larger class sizes, lower or higher, more students per teacher ratio.
Yeah.
And they had to get more efficient. That's just
necessity.
If you've ever been in a kindergarten classroom, the scariest moment is when they don't have anything to do. They just start going nuts. So worksheets and busies and stations and blah blah blah, and it was sort of forced upon us.
Yeah.
And the old cry that real education is elitist because the best education has always been the most personal, right?
Mm-hmm.
C.S. Lewis is saved by his dad out of a boarding school where he wasn't doing real well and sent to the old knock, right? The same fellow that taught his father is the one who winds up teaching most of the high school to C.S. Lewis, and it's one-on-one. Mm. And there's no wiggle room, but at the same time, it isn't anything like a prison.
No.
Because it's what does this kid need exactly, and there's no other kids to even be efficient with. So
it's more of an apprentice model where you focus on building the skills or the art or the knowledge base of that student.
Yeah, the only thing we have anything like that in America today is homeschooling, right?
Yeah.
And it's even there depending on the size of your family, but it's a pretty intimate form of education, and doesn't need a lot of the efficiency rules that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I've talked with homeschoolers. It's one of the main reasons for seeing people homeschool is the freedom to get away from the 45-minute class schedule and to get away from the bells and the all that. And of course, it's interesting that many teachers in traditional schools have a tendency to look down their nose at homeschoolers because they don't do those things.
Right.
And I'm like, but if I could get rid of that, I'm in a traditional school, so I got to pay attention to bells, and I got to go to lunch when lunch is served, and I got to, I got to play within the rules in my setting. But I'd love to give a lot of this stuff up. I could teach better if the lesson ended itself instead of the bell ending it. But we have to play within the thing. But that's not to give up hope and say that a traditional school or a classroom setting is just doomed to be like a prison. I'm in plenty of classrooms that aren't anything like a prison.
Good. So tell me about those, because I think that we should, if we're going to spend the time developing this metaphor, we ought to kind of press the edges and see where the creases are so that we can work around it, right? So what's a classroom like that isn't at all like a prison?
Well, the less a teacher is like a guard, right? Mm-hmm. So much of the classroom's climate is determined by the one ruling it.
Yeah.
And the less that role is treated as a ruler, and the more it's treated as what I'll call a tutor or a guide or somebody who's really excited to be studying what we're studying today.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And that's difficult. All the stuff that's piled up against a teacher today, it's tough. He's really constantly trying to manage his time and trying to get all the expectations, and he's got a whole bunch of other responsibilities that frankly have nothing to do with actual teaching, but they're just things that need to get done in a school setting or things that the government requires of him or that his administrator requires of him or whatever. So there are times when he's pulled away from being a great teacher by being a employee of a school / prison. Mm-hmm. But the best classrooms are where teachers are able to rise above all that or chuck it all back in the corner until after school or whatever, and have built let's just put it this way. They're at the helm of steering the ship away from the prison and towards a delightful garden.
Yeah, that's right. I think you're right that in the classrooms that I've been in, whether I was a student or a teacher, to the extent that the teacher, sometimes me, behaved like he was a member of the prison, it seemed like a prison to everyone else, right? Like a teacher who was not excited rarely produced the feeling of anything other than a prison, right? It was only, now sometimes us students would feel like we were rebelling, but it was still that sort of dichotomy. So I think that to the extent that teachers can model freedom for their students and also give them that freedom, that seems to me to be the best way to enact it and do away with that prison mindset.
Yeah, and I think that there is, this might sound like the prison mindset, but I don't mean it to. Having the end in sight, that this isn't the rest of your life. That the reason we're doing this now is for your delight later. It can be fun while we're doing it, but we're trying to form you into someone who doesn't feel like the rest of life is prison.
Right.
Does that make sense? That by receiving this education, by running all these wind sprints, we're going to be better than the other team. Mm-hmm. We're not necessarily going to enjoy all the wind sprints. Right. And some of you might even go over in the corner and throw up. Right. But that's okay given what we're trying to do. I know writing a paper may not be your choice at the moment, but it's not do it or fail. It's how can we get you into writing so that the paper isn't a burden so much as an opportunity to learn.
Yeah. And that sort of mentality, I think, is fantastic. Notice, everyone, that what we have, though, in that is the assumption that what you are assigning does have a purpose outside of itself, right?
Yeah.
Like a coach that says, do wind sprints, not because you're going to be able to beat the other team, but just because you're here and I don't have anything else for you to do. And
you're just all a bunch of slime balls anyway. Run.
Right. Yeah, just run. Just run. That is not, people probably aren't going to throw up in the corner because they're probably not going to run as hard.
Right.
Because they don't understand why they would. And frankly, they're right to not do it. So going back to Brooks, we have, there's each side of the relationship is seeing something, and we want to try and get away from that. It requires some responsibility on the side of the students. Of course it does. But teachers, let's not dismiss our own responsibility and instead just push it off on our students. We have to really model freedom and do it well if we're going to even hope that our students can achieve that.
Yep. I sorry for the long pause. The never give a student an answer he can get for himself, which is sort of the corollary of never answer the unasked question. Getting them involved in their education, right? The prisoner is passive. He simply does what he's told to do, what he's compelled to do, what he's made to do, what he has to do to survive.
He's getting through time as painlessly as possible.
Yep. Path of least resistance, head down, don't make eye contact, etc. The student, the learner, head is up, eyes are alert, and as much as possible, he's trying to own this thing. And the teacher moves away from the guardian position to that of a tutor the more he puts that power into the student's hands. Not games for game's sake to keep them busy, but games that in play bring about the same objectives that we might have had if we were lecturing, but we can play this game and learn it just as well. Better. Because it was enjoyable. Fun is what we're trying. And if you get the kids to boil it down, why is school so much like prison? Most of them will say either the word boring or it's no fun, which is the same thing.
Sure.
And they hate me when I start talking about the fact of how new a word boring is and whatnot. But the fact of the matter is some of this is taste. Our students are coming in expecting to be entertained. And so we have to work with that a little bit. That's where the analogy between prison and school kind of breaks down. It doesn't make any difference what your appetite is going into prison. It's you're only going to get what you get.
Well, and it doesn't matter how it's formed. Like a prison is not judged in any way based on the appetite of the prisoner coming in or out. It's a complete non-issue. It does not matter. And
the student conforms to it.
Yeah.
And
unfortunately, in some schools, it's the same way, right?
Yeah,
that it doesn't matter what the student gets or doesn't get. As long as they can mark the right answers, I don't care. Well, that's a bad school. Instead, what we need to be after is the thing that we're always talking about: formation.
Formation. Yep. Appetite. The ability to think for oneself is an amazing thing, and it does you no good in prison, and does you a world of good in school and in real life.
Vegetables.